in another place, another church, I had a good friend, parishioner, who was a lawyer by day and a chef at heart at all other times. He practiced the law, but he thought about food. Now, the church would do the usual kind of dinners that we do and you are used to seeing: fundraisers, pot pie dinners, spaghetti dinners, ham dinners, breakfasts, etc. But this gentleman would come along and step in for the special occasions. He would elevate the food for the Christmas bazaar. It was kind of neat to watch. Folks would have their bazaars when ours was, because they knew there'd be more traffic. So like all the other churches, but you could see it was very clear. People came to ours early, and you got breakfast, and then they went other places, and they came back for lunch. The food was so good. Soups that we simmered and cooked for 2 days, and exotic sandwiches you might find in a special little boutique. Fancy stuff. His crowning jewel, though, the biggest thing that he really got excited about a number of years, was a fancy Valentine dinner that we did. Now, just try to picture this here. Imagine you get all spiffed up like you're going to one of the fine restaurants wherever you might go, but you're entering into the fellowship hall, which we did up as best we could, but it was the fellowship hall in a rather old church. But you walk in the door, and you see private tables, and you see wait staff looking very official, and you walk into an amuse-bouche of caviar on toast points, etc. And then you sit down, and it is appetizers, a number of different appetizers, and soups, and salad, and the main course of filet mignon, or crab cake, or lobster tails, and absolutely decadent desserts. I never had finer meals at any restaurant that I've ever gone to, quite honestly. One year, he was having a big birthday. You know, one of those ones that has a zero on the end of it? And I saw this book at the bookstore, and I thought, this Warren needs this, and I picked it up. It wasn't a cookbook, but it was a book there that was around cooking and chefs. It had, I don't know, 30 or 40 of the top chefs in America, and a spread on each of them. The premise of the book was my last meal. If they knew it was going to be their last meal, what would they pick? And so you have the spread, a picture of them, and you'd have a spread of the food, and you'd have a description of how it was all laid out and what was significant about it. Some had menus that were ultra simple. I want a loaf of my Nana's bread that she used to make, and she's been gone for 50 years, but if I get my wish, I want a loaf of her homemade bread and some really good olive oil and some nice cheese and a bottle of wine. Other menus took up 2 whole pages to show it all laid out on a table. It looked like there should be footmen to serve some noble personage in a palace. They were that fancy and extravagant. Tonight, as we gather together, we remember Jesus' Last Supper. Now, if we were outside the church, if the idea of a Last Supper, a last meal were to come up and we weren't here in this context, the phrase Last Supper or last meal might make us think thoughts of a prisoner who is condemned, and the warden says, okay, Frank, it's your last meal, any special requests? And given that it was going to be their last meal, they might get a little more leeway than just having the ordinary prison cafeteria food. And I've seen stories on this, and it's usually reported when there's these events that go on. It can be interesting to see what someone to have for their last meal. When we consider what Jesus had, what was there at this last meal? You think back to Exodus chapter 12, it was very simple. They had lamb, lots and lots of lamb, with bitter herbs for seasoning, bread without yeast. So it was flat. That's it. That was the whole menu that God gave to Moses and Moses gave to the people that first Passover. Roasted lamb with bitter herbs and flat bread. Over the millennia, many different places. Cultural additions have appeared in the menu, making a fuller meal, meaning more variety in the meal, with all manner of foods to make a feast on this occasion. Much has been added to aid in the remembering and the celebrating of that first Passover. For example, it's pretty traditional in Passover anywhere that there are now 4 cups of wine throughout the meal. You didn't hear any mention of wine in Exodus, but now today, in most places, there will be 4 cups of wine throughout the meal, and they each have significance in the story. So do you think that lamb with bitter herb and unleavened bread was what Jesus liked the best? You think that was like, hey, that's my number one, that's my go-to? Maybe, maybe not. But what we see in the text, and we are clear about when we look at Luke telling the story, Jesus was deliberate, choosing the setting for this last meal. If it had been breakfast, it might have been different. If it had been lunch, it would have been different. But he chose this setting. Back up a bit, Jesus chose to come to Jerusalem. Now that was expected because he was an observant Jew. He was faithful, and Jews were supposed to come to Jerusalem for the Passover, for this big celebration or remembrance. But closer, Jesus chose to celebrate Passover with his disciples essentially a day early. There's a little bit of difference back and forth between the different gospel writers there, but most believe that Jesus chose to eat the Passover one day early with his disciples. Everyone else would have Passover the next day, not Jesus. I think that's significant, him choosing this in this way. We live in a time where the demands and desires of family and friends, obligations around holidays are such that you might have 2 or 3 Easters. Anybody here going to be at a couple different Easter celebrations, or you have to have a couple different Thanksgiving celebrations when that rolls around, or Christmas time? Good Lord, is there any end to it there? You've heard my stories. I know you have yours. Christmas, many people get stretched out over days or weeks depending on when people can gather and what is convenient. Passover, as God gave it, is prescribed. Exodus chapter 12, 1-6 says they're to take a 1-year-old lamb from the first of the month till the 14th day. By the way, the first month of their year, the month of Nisan, is going to fall right when we are celebrating Easter here in a few days, March and April, when Passover occurs. On the 14th day of Nisan, the first month of the year for them, sacrifice the lamb, prepare it, and eat it that night, which by Jewish reckoning, Jewish standards of time, means that they would be eating it into the next day, the 15th. That is what God commanded. It's very specific. Jesus bumped it up a day, we believe, knowing what was to come. So that symbolically, when Jesus died on the cross, when he gave up his spirit willingly, his sacrifice of self was on the day that everyone else would have slaughtered their Passover lambs for their Passover observance. And Jesus was steering the disciples to a Passover unlike any other. He didn't just do it the normal way they always do it, did he? Ahead of the day that would be unlike any other. He was setting this all up. He was planning this, fusing all this together, that they would never forget, and that they would have a lens through which to understand what would take place the very next day. We are accustomed to linking the bread and the cup, or one of the cups from the Passover, to Jesus and what he would do on the cross. This bread is my body. This cup is my blood. We should make that connection. We should link those things together, looking forward from this Passover to what Jesus will do, and then from there forward, for all who will see and remember what Jesus does. We should make that connection that looks forward from the perspective of that meal that night. But if we start at this Passover and look back, could it be that that is part of what Jesus wanted his disciples to get? Why he wanted to get to Passover as his last meal with the disciples before the cross. He wanted an association in their minds and in their hearts with this meal and this moment in time. Food, special foods or meals, ritual meals, shared food can make powerful memories. I know you know that. If we were to take the time to go around the room and dig into traditional meals, you could probably tell me traditional meals. What did Grandma serve for Easter or Christmas, or what was always for birthdays, or what were the special things? I can close my eyes and I can picture my grandmother's Christmas dinner every single year. Ham gravy, macaroni and cheese, mushrooms, lima beans, corn, homemade potato rolls, and lots of butter, and fresh made jam, homemade jams. For dessert, there was always pecan pie, and a few others, and some ice cream, and her homemade cookies, and her handmade homemade candy that she did, that we just gorged ourselves on. Even now, I can close my eyes, and thinking of that, I can remember more things. I can remember more things around that time, and there's time to tell you, just by memory of that meal repeated, just by bringing that back to mind. God commanded the Israelites to repeat Passover every year to make sure that they would never forget how he saved them. That's the key. He had them repeat it over and over and over again, year after year, in the same way, to remember how he saved them. It was a sign of God's faithfulness to them, a sign of God's love, a sign of God's power, a sign of God's blessing. Jesus, desiring to eat this meal with his disciples, sets what Jesus will do in the context of God's saving power, in the context of God's love, faithfulness, and blessing. Death of a loved one can crush a person. Death on a cross was especially horrific. But if the disciples didn't have eyes to see at the time, hopefully they soon would see that this death that was about to happen, Jesus' death on the cross, a thing they couldn't even imagine, and awful to witness as it was, had a far deeper, more powerful, more necessary meaning than they ever could have dreamed. Just as God had saved his people out of slavery and bondage from Egypt, from the hand of Pharaoh, now once again God was going to save his people. He was saving his people from bondage and slavery. Only the oppressor is not now an earthly king, an earthly ruler, an earthly army. Now the oppressor that he is saving his people from is sin and death. This is not a meaning that we are assigning after the fact to make ourselves feel better and to assuage our guilt. Jesus meant it this way. Jesus planned it this way ahead of time. He moved to Jerusalem when he did. He sent the disciples to get ready when he did. And it is obvious to carry out plans he already put in place with the one who would provide the room. He led the meal, of course. He showed the disciples what he wanted them to see, what he wanted everyone, everywhere, to see in time. Just like God instructed Moses centuries and centuries before with the first Passover, here today, let us see this time together this celebration as a gift that Jesus has left us. The message and the reminder of his love and his faithfulness and his saving power. Amen. Let us see what we do tonight as a way that we remember the saving power of Jesus Christ, the saving work that is meant for all, that is meant for you and me. And may we always be eager, as Jesus was eager to eat this meal and share this meal with his disciples, may we always be eager to share in this meal and the experience that Jesus left for us. Amen. I would like to invite